Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. This is your first time tuning in to the show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein. The Chargers are wrapping up their last week of OTAs before they take their nice little break. And then we come back, Dan, and then training camp will be in front of us. And OTAs resume tomorrow. They go through the 14th of this month. But Dan and I wanted to take this opportunity because especially before training camp starts, continuing in on our biggest off-season storyline segment that we wanted to bring up, we're going to be talking about the hot seat and how hot is it for certain players going into this season. We're going to have some names on this list that are going to be on the hot seat for a variety of different reasons. So it's not all going to be as it relates to overall play. And Dan and I are going to go through and break all those down with those corresponding players for you. But before we get into everything, Dan Wolkenstein, how are you, sir?
I'm great. I had a great weekend. Happy Monday to everyone out there. Hope everyone was enjoying it. I am good. Looking forward to these last few days of Chargers content and Chargers football that we get to discuss before we make up our own content, our own storylines to go through for the next.
It doesn't stop. So. It doesn't stop.
No, but all is well. Jake, how was Bachelorhood for the weekend?
You know, it was nice. Watched a couple of movies that I had gotten not a chance to watch in a long time, some new ones that I watched. So it was very nice. It was very relaxing having the house to myself and 3 animals. So this is
4 if you're including yourself.
Yeah, 4 if you included me, because I am definitely an animal. That is no question about it. But this is
Speaking of animal, did you try it? Did you try the aardvark fries?
I had not gotten a chance to do it this weekend, but I guarantee you you will have an update from me as it relates to that this week. For those that have no idea what the hell Dan and I are talking about, if anybody in the chat who's watching this has tried the new aardvark fries from Taco Bell, Dan and I were just intrigued enough by the name itself. And so I did tell Dan that I was going to be trying these and giving him a report because we're both Taco Bell fiends for sure. But Dan wanted a report from me on how good the aardvark fries were. And I did not get them this week, but I promise I will get back to him this coming week on how good those are. If anybody's tried them in the chat, let us know.
Yes, please. Good. Well, we have a lot to discuss today. So players on the hot seat, who has the most at stake this season, who has the most approved order to remain on the roster in 2025. Hot seat candidates upcoming, Jake. But before we get to that, let's pay the bills. Talk about our friends.
Well, want to remind everybody that BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your summer sports this season, from baseball, golf, NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available for you to follow for all of your favorite teams. Get into the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds for just about every team out there. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag, or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, go to the website and use the promo code UNLEASHED. Tell them that Chargers Unleashed sent you. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So a lot of storylines going into this Chargers season, and one of which is some of the players that have been on this team either for many years or maybe some for just a couple years may find themselves on the hot seat this year with a lot to prove, with sometimes in these situations very few opportunities to do so. And so what we wanted to discuss were some of the names on this Chargers team that may be on the hot seat, where if they don't produce, they might find themselves on different teams next year. And the type of player kind of spanned the gamut, if you will. We have players on here like Joey Bosa, which we'll get to, maybe a hot take. Josh Palmer is going to be on this list. We'll talk about JT Woods, Isaiah Spiller, lots of players on here for different reasons we feel have make or break seasons ahead of them, make or break training camps ahead of them, and have the most to prove in order to remain on the roster in 2024 and 2025 and beyond. So, Jake, without further ado, let's go ahead and kick this thing off with first one. Mr. Chris Rumph and Isaiah Spiller. And we have rankings here. 1, or technically 0.5, all the way to 3 flames. 3 flames being the hottest of hot seats. 1/2 being the least. Chris Rumph, Isaiah Spiller, Jake. Seats are hot, man. Seats are hot for both of them for different reasons, but equally hot, almost.
Yeah. Chris Rumph, obviously the obvious choice. That was the first name that Dan and I actually brought up when we were going through this list. And for obvious reasons now, because when you look at the time that he has been on this team and the unfortunate lack of production that he has been able to put in thus far, and then you go out and you see what has taken place with the edge position alone over the last 2 years, and the Chargers drafting Thule and seeing the great rookie season that he had, the Chargers once again doubling up and making that position better by going out and getting Bud Dupree. So now essentially Chris Rumph is coming into this training camp as essentially edge 5 with still even some edge competition around him that ultimately might end up making the practice squad. I don't think that you can make your arguments for it, but I don't think that there's a hotter name on this list just because of what has taken place from a roster construction perspective. And obviously from what Chris Rumph has been able to produce over the last few years, which unfortunately for him, due to players in front of him or just his own production, it hasn't been able to be enough. And I would be hoping, just from the standpoint, because we knew when Chris Rumph was brought in that there would be some development hurdles that he would have to go through. But in terms of his skill set, I don't think that he's really gotten the opportunity to fully maximize that. And that's, again, for a variety of different reasons. So Chris Rumph definitely at the top of this for a multitude of different reasons. Dan, what do you think? Because I know that you were a big fan of his when the Chargers drafted him a couple years ago on day 3.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard because I think I saw what the staff saw in him coming out of Duke, but he just hasn't kind of taken it to that next level. And realistically, if we're being honest, he has not really shown much in terms of on-field improvements in games that matter. Like there was, I think, 2 off seasons ago where in preseason he looked like pretty good. We're like, oh, Chris Rumph, maybe this is a breakout. And then it just never ended up coming to fruition. We're looking at 3 seasons, defensive grades, according to PFF, 2021, 60.8, 48.5 in 2022, 58.2 this past season, and a grand total of 3 sacks in his entire career. Not going to do it, especially when you are in a room with this much star-studded talent, especially when you are relied upon if folks get hurt. You can't have that precipitous drop-off. It's what plagued this team for years. And again, this is not just who's on the hot seat for 2025, but who's on the hot seat to even get to 2024. Because right now, he's at best edge 5. And you can make an argument that there might be reasons for other people to be ahead of him. So hot seat candidate for sure. Isaiah Spiller is the other one. And these are for different reasons. Isaiah Spiller's kind of been an enigma, right? We've all seen him. He was so young coming out of A&M, and he simply has not gotten run at all during the regular season. And some of it we heard from previous coaching regime was because they didn't see it working out for him during camp, during practice, and never got a run. Everyone else played ahead of him. Too much to the chagrin of Chargers fans who were desperate to see a running game that did something. When the running game was so bad, how could it get worse? And he never got a shot for 2 years now. So Isaiah Spiller now looks at a running back room and he's looking up at 3 guys. He's at best running back 4 right now. I would argue that his skill set and his physique is something this team needs, but How much of an opportunity is he going to get with Kamani Vidal, Kamani Vidal, J.K. Dobbins, and Gus Edwards ahead of him? And he's still got Elijah Dotson there. We don't know there. It's tough. It's a tough situation for him. Unfortunate, unfair, I would say at times, but the seat remains hot.
Yeah, it really is an unfortunate situation for him. I mean, obviously, going into this season, you would think, hypothetically, if the Chargers brought in, only one of Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and maybe if they didn't draft Kamani Vidal, that this would actually be a perfect situation for Isaiah Spiller to walk into, because his mold fits exactly the type of running style that Jim Harbaugh wants from his running backs. I feel like it would translate perfectly to what Greg Roman wants in his running scheme. You heard Coach McDonald talking about Isaiah Spiller last week during the press conferences and saying, he's making a lot of strides in terms of his overall progress, in terms of what he's listening to, what he's learning and coming in. And Dan, to your point, it is still strange from the standpoint that from the time when he is drafted until now, that we have virtually barely seen a lick of Isaiah Spiller in regular season games. And this is going through two different offensive coordinator regimes. Didn't see the field with Joe Lombardi, didn't see the field with Kellen Moore. And as you had mentioned, the coaching staff had basically said that his play during practice had not risen above what was out there between Austin Eckler, Joshua Kelly. But at the same time, the running game has been so bad for the Chargers that why wouldn't you at least see what you have to verify what it is that you're either seeing in practice so that you can make a corresponding move? So just from the standpoint of lack of opportunity, and now especially with the roster being revamped at the running back stable position, this is a tough one. I don't, and it's tough for a variety of reasons, because Dan, we've discussed the really good possibility that the Chargers could keep 6 wide receivers. How many running backs are you going to keep by the time that training camp comes to a close? Do you only keep 3? Do you keep this stable of 4 between Edwards, Dobbins, Vidal, and Spiller? I don't know. So it's essentially could be a very short clock for Isaiah Spiller. And it's unfortunate because I do believe that he has the talent to succeed in a good running scheme such as this. And I hope that he gets every opportunity possible to show it off.
I agree. That's going to be an interesting one. And again, it might be unfair, but it is what it is. And that's kind of the hand that he was dealt. Moving on. A couple corners here. A couple of DBs, 1 corner, 1 safety. JT Woods, and this might be a surprise to some, but Asante Samuel Jr. here. Let's start with Asante Samuel Jr. We have 1.5 flames for Asante Samuel Jr. And this is a tough one because we all know how important the secondary is for Jesse Minter and Clinkscale and Jim Harbaugh and just any NFL team in general, but especially this one. But we also know how this DB room is so there's so much variables. There's so many variables to this. And I would be surprised if we saw 70% turnover year over year from his cornerback group. So Asante Samuel Jr., 6 interceptions his entire career, 9 if we're including the postseason. He had that 1 3-interception game in Jacksonville, which we're not going to talk about. But if we look at Asante Samuel Jr., generally speaking, pretty darn good in coverage. Pretty darn good overall. He's improved year over year in overall defensive grades according to PFF. But his tackling is an issue. And DBs that don't tackle don't do well and don't last long in this style offense. This style defense. I've always loved, and I still do, love his game. I think that there's some technique refinement in tackling that can help take him to the next level. Again, you go look at who they drafted this year. Look who they brought in free agency. You got Kristian Fulton, you got Cam Hart, you've got Tarheeb Still. There's a lot of competition, both inside and outside corner positions. Asante Samuel Jr., if he doesn't produce, do they re-sign him? He's on a contract year. If he does ball out, then the alternative is, are they going to pay? I would think so, because he has the mentality that they love. Interesting one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is an interesting position for him, Dan, because he's essentially the veteran of this cornerback group with all the turnover that's taken place over the last 2 years. The Chargers have drafted 4 cornerbacks in the last 2 years between Jasir Taylor, Dean Leonard, and you had mentioned Still and Hart. You go out and you get a free agent and Kristian Fulton to come in to kind of round out that group for this season. And so he's actually while he does fall into that hot seat category, again, this is for a very different reason. For him, it's a contract year. And yes, there are some things from his game that still need to be perfected and still need to develop, but he's undoubtedly the best corner that you've had, even for the past couple years. Really, just being honest. I mean, if you think about it, when it was him, J.C. Jackson, and Michael Davis, I mean, he was the one that performed the best out of that by a landslide. So you go back to training camp a year ago, Dan, he started off hot in training camp. And unfortunately, for a variety of different reasons, I'll attribute that to some of his play and then overall some of the defensive scheme as well. It didn't end up being what he probably was hoping it could be. And now we're hearing these reports again in OTAs. He's starting off hot again. And I'm really excited to see what he's going to do in Jesse Minter's defense, and more specifically of how Coach Clinkscale has talked about how he wants his DBs to be versatile.
But real quick, that's the thing about Asante Jr. is the ball production was never the issue. They're not tackling right now.
That's right.
That's always been the issue. So yeah, I'm sure he's balling out. I expect that from him, given what they're able to do right now.
No, that's a good point. But I think from the standpoint of what Coach Clinkscale is wanting from this entire DB room in general, and talking about having them be more versatile, I don't think there's anybody that has a bigger advantage than Asante Samuel Jr. than that, because we know already that he can play the slot, he can play outside. So in terms of having those opportunities, he's going to have every opportunity to go out there and possibly put together his best season. But I love the point that you brought up in terms of whether or not he produces, or he does he get a second contract? I think a lot of people maybe believe that as of this moment right now, the production hasn't warranted a second contract. So is this a make or break year for him to stay on this team? Yeah, I would say so. And even if he does produce, I think it'd be hard to not re-sign him, just given the other question marks that are on your team. So yeah, I think it's definitely a hot seat for a much different reason in terms of what Asante Samuel Jr. is looking to accomplish this year.
Jake, what do you make of JT Woods and the seat that he's on right now?
Honestly, I think that I know you put your little graphics up here, and maybe it should be a little bit higher, because a lot like
we're going higher than two flames,
higher than 2. And I'll say that just from the standpoint of, much like Isaiah Spiller, there's barely any game film that we have really seen from JT Woods, but even that of what we have seen, it hasn't looked good.
According to PFF, by the way, Jake, this surprised me. 91 total snaps over the past 2 seasons. I would never have thought he had 90 snaps.
Neither did I. I thought it was lower.
I would have guessed half that.
I thought it was lower than that.
But still.
But yes, to your point, Dan, like when he was selected a couple years back, we knew at that point in time, it's like, okay, here we go, because this was Tom Telesco still in the GM seat. We could already kind of figure, like, here we go. There's another 3rd round developmental prospect that the Chargers are bringing in. And that's what's essentially taken place over the last couple of years, whether it's been from the play that we've seen, or more notably the play that we haven't seen, just from him not getting the opportunity to be on the field. And on top of that, the rising play from Alohi Gilman has not done JT Woods any favors. So I think those flame graphics should be maybe one is missing one flame in there in terms of where his hot seat is on this roster right now, because there is a lot of implications as it relates to JT Woods heading into this year.
Yeah, and the part that's unfortunate is, like, I go back to the previous regime and I wonder who actually made the decision to bring in JT Woods, to draft him. And you mentioned kind of the 3rd round special, right? But like, he doesn't. You look at Alohi Gilman, you look at Derwin James. He is not either of those. He's a very different style of secondary player. And He's not physical. He takes bad angles so far in his career. Not a great tackler. And he was brought in, I think, because of his ball production, because he was pretty darn good in college. Hasn't had a chance to do that. Like, he can't get on the field. Then you look at the safety group currently, right? UDFAs, you've got Derwin James, Loki Gilman, you got AJ Finley, you've got, I don't know how much room he has. And the part that we heard from the previous regime that I just don't know if they even have this is like, at the end of the day, you know, I just don't know if this team has patience, honestly, for them to learn, right? Like, I don't think that this team is thinking, you know what, I think we're going to give them some time. I think we have to let them develop, give them 2 or 3 years, whatever it is. I don't think this coaching staff and this management is going to give them that time. Like this, they're like, we got to win now. I'm not going to wait 2-3 years for this guy to develop. We saw that in players that were selected in a Trey McKitty. We saw that with Trey Pipkins out of Sioux Falls. We saw that with JT Woods. A lot of these developments, and it's fine to have developmental players selected in day 3. I don't know where his opening is to get onto the field, to be honest. Is there one? Aside from injury, and even with an injury, let's be real here. Do we think that this coaching staff trusts him to replace either of those two?
I mean, there's not much weight you can put behind it right now, truly. Unless this whole coaching staff for the secondary basically comes in and reinvents JT Woods in a single offseason, which I still think is a long shot for that to do. You see him now, it's like, okay, that he is one of your backups. And outside of that, I don't think that there's any reason to say that you would put him above anybody else right now. And considering, again, where you drafted him and what everybody else knew about him coming into the league, the play just hasn't warranted it. And if he hasn't been able to be on the field over the last 2 years, whether it's been due to injury or lack thereof of not being able to perform well enough in practice, you have to look at this. And from a standpoint of Joe Hortiz talking about, you know, we're never going to stop looking for secondary players. And now what you have there with Jesse Minter and what he's going to want from his safeties, and more specifically Coach Clinkscale in that circumstance. Yeah. I mean, hell, let's not forget, we just heard recent reports of another former Raven coming to possibly work out for the Chargers, and we'll await on possible word from there for a certain veteran safety that may be joining the team. So yeah, as it relates to JT Woods, I think it's an uphill climb for him. There would have to be significant progress to say that he could be with this team much longer.
Yeah. One name that I think Chargers fans at this point, I haven't even seen his name appear during any of the OTAs. Tight end Donald Parham Jr. And this sucks because I think as a person, as potential, and as like just looking at freakish athleticism and possibilities, they're endless with Donald Parham Jr. But for whatever reason, call it scheme, call it injuries, call it whatever, it just hasn't progressed the way that I think Chargers fans thought that it could since he was brought in. And it's not like he hasn't had the snap counts to do so. Like, he's gotten almost 1,300 snaps now under his belt here in the NFL. And he hasn't been terrible, but he certainly is not the bona fide tight end one. When he's been utilized, I think he has shown that he could be, but he hasn't really gotten the run to do so. And then you see this Chargers team go out and get Hayden Hurst to be what sounds like from all the coaching staff, their tight end one. And they bring in Will Dissly, and you're hearing Zach Hines ball out during OTAs at this point. And you've got Stone Smart. Like, I've heard all these names. I haven't heard Donald Parham's name come up once. So this is not only a hot seat for the 2025 season. Hell, this is a hot seat for getting through training camp. It's a name that I think we forget, but boy, it kind of just seems like he's kind of just gone into the shadows and no one's heard from him.
I'll fully agree with you as it relates to Donald Parham that this sucks to talk about him in this category, because when we've seen him on with his athleticism for what he can bring to the passing game, it's such a cool asset to have as it relates to this Chargers team. Again, you talk about athletic tight ends that the Chargers have had. You know where your mind goes initially when you start thinking of those guys. And Donald Parham, for all of his gifts and his traits that he brings to the game, it's strange, Dan, because you can kind of almost say that the very reasons of what makes Donald Parham great are also some of the reasons on why the Chargers went out and got Will Dissly, Hayden Hurst, because it's certain things that Donald Parham does not do that made them make those moves. And now bringing in Andy Bischoff as the tight ends coach and run game coordinator, you now kind of have an idea of what this plan is. And something that's eluded the Chargers for years at the tight end position is finding capable tight ends that can block.
Yep.
And everything that Donald Parham does as it relates to the passing game, the blocking aspect of it has been the one thing that's eluded him. And on top of that, he's battled through some injuries over the last few years. And obviously the concussion a few years back that was really bad. And Dan and I were on the sidelines at training camp when we saw him pull up with his hamstring after he had caught a long pass. And it's just seemed to be one thing after another for Donald Parham. And I will say on top of that, utilization. We thought when Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator of this team that there would be much more opportunity for him and in tight end and two tight end sets, especially when we got closer to the goal line. That didn't end up coming to fruition. Even when the Chargers' weapons were going down, I still believe that the tight ends were underutilized in Kellen Moore's system. He didn't get enough opportunities for that. So it's a number of it's a combination of plenty of things as it relates to Donald Parham. But to Dan's point, yeah, this is a tough one to have even Donald Parham on this list because of what he brings to the game, but also you understand where the system's going, that he has a lot of catching up to do in terms of what they want from their tight ends in this group.
Yeah, and take away, even if he was 100% healthy and even if he was performing, purely scheme fit is a question mark for if he can remain on the team. We've got a handful more here to kind of wrap this one up. Jake, one that I think Chargers fans, we heard people talk about, and we heard for months now, and then we heard Quentin Johnston come to the podium and kind of take it all on the chin and kind of open up and talk honestly about his kind of self-criticism. But we have Quentin Johnston on here as a hot seat. And do I think that they're going to end up cutting him, if he has another tough year? No, I don't. But in terms of like trajectory of his career, and in terms of, you look at the wide receiver room, right? This receiver room is crazy deep. And there's another receiver we have on here on this list we'll talk about in a second. But that seat's hot in terms of a wide receiver selected high who has the GM, current and former, name on him. Joe Hortiz talked about he liked him as well. In an offense that they need that style that he should be able to bring. He's performed against Jim Harbaugh at a high level. But that receiver room is deep to where if he doesn't perform, there might be a shorter leash than we might expect. And will he get cut? I don't know. But are they going to pull away some snaps? Absolutely. They're not going to wait for him. I don't think that's happening.
No, I agree with you, Dan. And we talked about this a lot last week during our live show because Quentin Johnston was up at the podium. And obviously he talked about how bad his rookie season ate at him. Mentioned the Green Bay game and how much he would dwell on that and think about that. And yes, I think he's on this hot seat because you think about expectations for being a first-round pick last year. And again, combination of things in terms of hills that he had to go through in order to produce. Much were himself, much was the scheme, because I don't think that he was ready to go at all after Mike Williams went down. And even when he was inserted in there, he wasn't even getting targeted that much throughout those first 3 weeks. So that tells you.
And when he was, it was not the way he should have been.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think he's definitely on this hot seat because you look at the rookie season. He's already kind of starting a little bit behind the 8 ball. But now you have a revamped coaching staff. Jim Harbaugh, who you mentioned, knows Quentin Johnston from that playoff game and how well he performed against him. And if this coaching staff is true to their word, and I believe that they are in terms of putting guys in position that's going to be where they excel the best, they should be able to get the best Quentin Johnston out of this team thus far. Now, is that going to mean 1,000-yard season, 10 touchdowns? No, I don't think anybody should be setting those type of expectations for Quentin Johnston, even going into his second year and even with this coaching staff. But also to Dan's point, there is a reason why you went out and drafted 3 wide receivers. On the off chance that anything possibly that could happen, you at least need to cover your bets in certain circumstances. So obviously rooting for Quentin Johnston this season. There's nowhere to go but up. But there will be some expectations for that he sets for himself and that everybody else has on this team for him going into this year.
Yeah. 3 more names here. Joey Bosa, Josh Palmer, and Trey Pipkins are the last 3 that we have on this list, and all for different reasons. Joey Bosa, great player, but has the asterisk. We're going to talk about it ad nauseum, but great player. And oh, by the way, Jake, a great player with a 2025 cap hit of $36.4 million. $36.4 million. That's after the restructure and pay cut that he already took this year. That's with Tuli on this roster. Khalil Mack, people might say, oh, why isn't he on the list? He's done it. When he was brought in, he's done what he's supposed to do. And Joey Bosa simply hasn't. Not necessarily because he's a bad player, but because of roster construction and because of salary cap. If he doesn't produce, is he worth the risk? I say no.
I agree with that, Dan. And again, you talk about just expectations in general. You know, that injury bug is always going to follow Bosa in this regard. So in terms of those expectations, on top of the cap hit that was reconstructed for that very reason. But hey, Jesse Minter got what he wanted. He wanted to have all 3 of the combination between Bosa, Mack, and Tuli going into this season. And when you look at Bosa, he still is one of the, the top edge setters in terms of the run game goes. So when he's healthy, we know that he can produce. There's no question about that. And in these 3 pass rusher sets that we're going to see from Mack, Bosa, and Tuli, we've seen the production that comes out of that already. But the fact that those 3 have only played 44 snaps last year, that sucks. So yeah. Major expectations for Bosa heading into this year.
Yep. Josh Palmer, Jake, weird one. I have 1.5. We don't need to go long on this one, but essentially, again, wide receiver room deep. Josh Palmer, when healthy, pretty darn good. I have him as a solid wide receiver too. But roster construction, we talk about, are the Chargers now with this new regime going to pay wide receivers? I don't know. Josh Palmer, if he balls out, I mean, that's $10, $15 million a year that they're probably going to be spending on him. I don't know if they do it. If he doesn't perform, they're probably not going to retain him, or maybe they retain him on a cheap contract. I'm not sure, but I think this is a kind of make or break season for him in the sense of, can he be dependable? What can he be trusted as? Can he be their wide receiver 2 upside for the foreseeable future? Or is he wide receiver 2 when healthy, when all things are going the right way? I'm not sure. Josh Palmer, we like, but is he a bona fide wide receiver 1? No, in my opinion. Is he a really, really good wide receiver 3 in an offense? Absolutely. And that's what he was with Michael Williams, Keenan Allen. I'm not sure what he's going to be. That's why this is kind of a hot seat, make or break season for Josh Palmer. Last one, Jake. Trey Pipkins.
This should be obvious just from the standpoint of Trey Pipkins got his contract after his best season a couple years ago. This is going into year 2 of his new contract, now essentially shifting from right tackle to right guard based off of what we've seen in OTAs. There's a reason that you went out and you drafted Joe Alt, obviously. And even from the standpoint of what Trey Pipkins is making from a contract purpose, this is this coaching staff trying to get the best out of Trey Pipkins. And you get an opportunity to see what he's been able to do over the last several years at right tackle, and it's definitely been inconsistent, up and down. There's been some good moments and some bad moments. If this does not work out at right guard for him, which again, with Bradley Bozeman to his left and essentially Joe Alt as right, it's the best opportunity for him to succeed in this scheme. So for a position change for him, I think is good. I think ultimately it'll benefit him, especially with, I don't think that he has the foot quickness to deal with the edge rushers that we've seen in the past, and that's been consistent. So having a guy like Joe Alt essentially to your right should only make Trey Pipkins better. And again, when he has shown those flashes of being good, it's been good to see. But Trey Pipkins, again, heading into year 2 of a 3-year contract extension, now switching positions, and you've seen what the Chargers have kind of done in order to find the best 5 and especially even build up depth. You know, you've got Jamari Sawyer right behind him as well and a couple others that you could possibly get into that mix. It's definitely a hot seat year for Trey Pipkins, but ultimately moving to positions to guard based off of what we've seen from him the last several years should ultimately benefit him.
Yeah, again, Trey Pipkins has a $9.25 million cap hit next year. Are you paying that for a backup tackle? I doubt it. Are you paying that for a starting guard? Maybe. Probably, honestly. If he comes out and balls out as a guard, I think they do it. I think they're good with that. Again, protect Justin at all costs. Establish a run game. If he can help do that, they value that and they prioritize that. But if he doesn't, and that's in training camp or in the season, he becomes a liability or a question mark, I think that ripcord is real quick to be pulled. So a lot of names here, probably some that may surprise folks. And I think there are some that take a little bit of a nuanced conversation to have, right? But at the end of the day, these players are under pressure. And again, every player is under pressure. So let's just, put it in perspective. But without performing in a pretty darn big improvement in terms of actual production on the field, take away the excuses. If those don't happen this year, most of these players are probably not going to be on this team in 2025. And so the stage is set. The plates are at the table. What are we going to see? And how many opportunities are they even going to have? Some of this is easy. Some of this is luck. Some of this is opportunity. Some of this is pure will. We'll see. Anything else, Jake? Went through a bunch of names here. Kind of went rapid fire a bit. Anything you missed?
I think we covered it down. Honestly, there's arguably you could find reasons to put other players on this list, but I think these are the biggest ones that we found going into this season. And again, for a variety of different reasons, much like Dan said, it'll depend on a variety of factors on whether or not some of these guys remain on the roster in 2025. So plates are set, fork, knife, all you need is your steak. We know where that comes from.
Yes. It's time to eat. It's time to eat. But until then, it's time for us to go. For Jake, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.